And hello and welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program Kethane Wars. And before we get started, I'm just going to show you the spacecraft that we will be launching today. So I built this one off camera. I actually recorded it, but then ended up changing it and then not recording the changes. So I'm just going to run over the final product right now. Let's see. This. So it's the CEK Mayflower core. This is a probe-based space station core. So again, it has my multi-engine setup. The reason why I don't have them indented is because it was being stupid, not letting me. And I'm using a mainsail mostly just because of I need this extra thrust. Because it is carrying a lot of extra fuel. So these 4 engines aren't really effective when you have more than just like 3 tanks. You can do it, but it's not really worth it. Or something like this is a great setup. The reason why I'm not using a single orange tank and instead I'm using these ones is because these won't overheat if I full throttle. And because I tend to not pay attention to that stuff, I tend to cause problems later. So as usual, you probably want to include separatrons on these big guys because you don't want them nicking your rocket as they detach, because it tends to break everything. Struts kind of all over. And then we get to this stage right here, which wasn't actually used in the launch at all, because we actually had more than enough fuel. Basically it's a single nuclear engine, plus just a fairly substantial amount of fuel and a probe body in case we need to deorbit it on its own or whatever. We have basically access, and we can always refuel this and keep it with us and then move it around if we want to. So it's useful to have these engines around, and we can always use them as tugs if we want. But again, it has no RCS, so it's only a little bit useless. And then here we got the actual station core. You'll notice that this is actually a fairly vertical core, and it doesn't actually use the quad coupler thing. Most of the reason for that is the quad coupler is actually very, very, very heavy. So doing something like this, it's very similar, actually gives you a little bit more room, and is about the same weight. Again, this will probably hit your computer's performance a little bit worse because there's more parts, more physics, whatever. So if you can avoid it and you don't really care about the weight, it's fine. But I don't really like that station core. And besides, you can't, like, for example, you can't do this. Putting on symmetry with that thing. It just doesn't like it. Including a couple big solar panels, we probably don't need this much power, as there is actually nothing on this station. So we include a small docking port in case we want to dock up a rocket we've already designed before, which is just a low Kerbin orbit rocket, which should have the capability to go to the Moon. I haven't tried it, and we might eventually want to dock up some crew members with this station because there's currently nothing, as this is in fact a probe body as we look here. Another thing to note is the fact that it actually carries a really large battery. This is so that we can go like an entire night cycle without having to refuel. We don't have enough power here that we can just simply wait through the night while doing things. And although I've already launched this thing, I actually forgot to put lights on it. I don't know if we'll be launching another one, but I always forget to do this, so I will do it now while I still remember. So, lights. This just helps you find it in case you have the misfortune of docking at night, which seems to be my problem. I always seem to accidentally dock at night, or get to the station at night, or the above, or the etc. Whatever. It's always at night. I'm just going to save that, and then I'm going to switch to the actual like flight. Not so much the building, just the actual flight of this thing to the Moon. And then I'll talk you through about how actually that worked. And I'll see you in a bit. Alright, and here we are, taking off from the gantry. Essentially what I'm trying to do now is accelerate pretty much quick-ish. You want to accelerate too quickly, there's not much point to slow down in the atmosphere. Like I said last video, all it does is waste fuel to air friction. Essentially what I'm doing by spinning around the camera is just making sure nothing's broken off, and then just checking my fuel drain, which is draining relatively quickly, but not nearly as bad if I were to have 4 mainsails or whatever. Let me just get ready to stage our first set of engines. And I'm doing a fairly simplified asparagus design, only 2 sets. And essentially you can go crazy with that, and you can go ahead and have like 8. I usually don't bother, I just tend to make 4 bigger ones. You could make it more efficient with more engines, but I figure this is... In a real-life space program, this would be a cheaper way of doing it, is having less, just wasted engines. So, we start banking over at around 8,000, just to about 10 degrees or so. And because of the slight spin we have, because of our lack of vectored thrust, it actually tends to cause a little bit of issues. And all I'm doing right now on the map is making sure that I am actually gaining height on my apoapse, and that little number there, the distance away, is actually increasing. As long as that number is increasing, you're probably okay. And you don't ever really want to see that number decreasing while you are thrusting your engines at full throttle. If it is happening, you might need to put more engines on, or drop weight, or something. You basically never want to see that number going down for any reasonably long amount of time. And essentially we stay at 10% for a little while, and we just want to get that up to about 60,000, and then we're going to start banking over pretty soon. We're going to be dropping those tanks, and now we're on the single mainsail. Again, the mainsail has a fairly low ISP, so it's like specific thrust, so it's actually not nearly as efficient of a launch as it could be. But as I stated when we were building this thing, that yeah, I don't really like the little 4 thrusters, while yes being better in my opinion, don't have enough thrust to carry a full fuel tank, and it basically just be a giant burden that wastes fuel for all the other runs. And essentially what I'm doing is, you'll notice that even though I'm only about 60,000, 70,000-ish, is I've completely banked over 90 degrees. And I'm trying to basically, not really worrying about vertical velocity, and just worrying entirely about horizontal. I'm not going to complete my burn here, and I'm going to be cutting thrust soon. Like about now, I think. Yeah, so I cut my thrust, and now I'm basically going to coast up a bit. I'm adjusting it with RCS, making sure I'm in the right location, everything's all peachy and perfect. So we are thrusting up now. I'm not actually using any maneuver nodes right now, mostly because I've done orbits around Kerbin so many times that I don't really need to. Again, they might help you save a little bit of fuel, but I'm noticing that we have actually an exceptionally large amount of fuel that I'm probably not going to burn through, so I'm not really worried about it. And I'm just setting my orbit around at about 120,000, and I'm using the space station that, like, there's a community, like, group space station that I'm basically matching orbits with. I'm not planning to dock with it, but I'm using it just as a quick rough, like, way to circularize my orbit. And here I am, just preparing to go to the moon. First I overshoot, but that's the benefit of maneuver nodes, no mistakes are really made. Except for when you grab the pink thing, which I'm about to do soon. Right here. Yep, there's me screwing up my orbit. It's a little bit difficult to fix these kind of things, and never quite gets there. But essentially what I'm doing with my maneuver nodes right now is I'm basically scrubbing my orbit to try and find the ideal encounter. And just checking my power, I decided to deploy my solar panels before I need to. But again, we have the large batteries, so we probably have more than enough. And this is when I first realized that I'm actually missing my lights. And a little bit of rage shake there. So okay. Basically, we got plenty of time, so I'm just going to slowly get myself into position on the blue thing. And then I'm just going to time accelerate ahead until we need to do our burn. And because we still have a mainsail, the game basically goes, oh, you only have a 30-second burn, which is pretty good, because if we were doing it with a nuclear engine, it might take considerably longer. And because we have so much fuel, there's no sense wasting it. And one thing to note actually about my maneuver node here is that I'm actually pointing along normal because I know that maneuver node is off. So I'm not going to use it. And this is me just going full throttle to try and get my speed down as soon as possible. We basically timed it so that the node will be passed by about 5 seconds when we're done our burn. And again, I'm not really paying attention to the node because I know it's wrong. But I overshoot it anyways and actually make my orbit a little bit too quick. And I actually am going to way overshoot the moon. I think that might actually be an escape velocity. Looks like it might be. So, oops. And now you can see here I'm actually checking our fuel and realizing that, hey, we still actually have a decent amount. Probably enough to finish our mooner burn. I'm actually contemplating it here, again, checking our fuel reserves. I'm just doing a quick little math check to realize, oh, yeah, we might actually have enough. So, I actually do a couple clutch moves here after I set up the maneuver node so I know how much time I have. Realizing I got loads of time, I start transferring some fuel around. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to try and keep this giant fuel tank intact and attached to our ship. Because it doesn't have a docking clamp on it or any sort of node on it, I don't want to completely ditch it into space because it would be really useful to have all that extra fuel space on a space station that's supposed to be basically processing a bunch of kethane eventually. Again, we're going to have to send up all the kethane stuff on its own, but that will be done in a later episode. And here we are, just getting ready to do our burn. Just dropping out of time excel, getting closer. And because we still have the mainsail, we have a really short 15-second burn. Or, yeah. So, just a quick burst on the engine, leaning on the throttle for a little bit, and we're good to go. And we will still have leftover fuel. So again, if I wanted to do this more efficiently, I could have brought more fuel to the moon, but because we don't have actually any space station or ships here already, not much sense bringing a bunch of fuel that nothing can use. So I figured that fuel would be better used to basically allow me to carry more fuel in the future, which we plan to send up at some point. The station doesn't have a whole lot of RCS blocks, so it's actually a little bit difficult to maneuver, so I'm going to try and make this orbit more circular. And now I just have to switch to the other side and balance out the orbit, which I'll be fiddling around with soon, and I'm setting up maneuver nodes to do that. It takes you actually quite a while because it just seems overly sensitive with just the slightest pull. And this is not quite getting balanced, so I sort of kind of rush through it, keep screwing it up, and trying back, and doing whatever, pulling on this, pulling on that, and eventually I get it kind of right. Of course, when I do the actual burn, I end up botching it up. And as we approach the node, again, we took a little bit of time to point to the blue thing ahead of time. And just a quick, like, not even noticeable burn, just 22 delta V. And just flop. Yep, we're there. And you'll notice we still have a tiny bit of fuel still inside of our spaceship. And I'm just basically going around and making sure all my engines are off, all the fuel has their flow disabled. That way I don't accidentally knock my space station out of orbit, because mainsails are definitely one of those nasty engines that you could very easily ruin your day with. So I don't want to take the chance, and in fact I am going to take precautions against taking the chance. Making sure I got everything. And now for the best part of every single station launch is the screenshot spectacular. Going around looking for cool pictures to put on Facebook and brag about. And for anyone not aware, you can actually hold down the middle mouse wheel button, and you can actually rotate the camera around. Like, rotate the focus point, the pivot point of your camera. And I'll thank you guys for all watching. This was episode 4 of the Kerbal Space Program Kethane Wars. This has been MrCarltron, and I thank you for watching, and hope you'll come back later, and we can start mining some kethane. That sweet, sweet green gold. Green, Kerbal, green gold.